My father, Richard, stands in my beautiful suburban driveway demanding I sign over the deed to give this house to my half-sister Jessica because family comes first. My stepmom, Patricia, smirks beside him, wearing the same expression from 17 years ago when she destroyed my teenage life with a calculated lie. But this time, I hold evidence that will shatter their world completely. A manila folder containing the truth that drove me from home at 16, homeless and heartbroken, now ready for ultimate justice. Looking back, my childhood in Riverside, California felt like something from a storybook until I turned 13. My father, Richard, owned a thriving automotive parts distribution business that kept our middle-class neighborhood humming with prosperity. After my mother died in that terrible car accident when I was 8 years old, Dad threw himself into raising me with the devotion of both parents combined. Those 5 years belonged just to us. Every Saturday morning, he would wake me up with the smell of blueberry pancakes wafting from our sunny kitchen. He taught me to change oil in his garage, showing me how to check tire pressure and explaining why regular maintenance kept engines running smoothly. During homework time, he would sit beside me at our dining room table, patiently helping with math problems and reading my book reports aloud to check for errors. Dad never missed a single volleyball game during my middle school years. He would arrive early, claiming the best seat in the bleachers, cheering loudly enough for everyone to hear. Other parents knew him as Cecilia's dad and respected how he balanced running a business with being present for every important moment in my life. When I turned 13, everything began shifting in ways I could not have predicted. Dad started dating Patricia Hughes, a dental hygienist he met at his annual cleaning appointment. Patricia appeared to be everything we needed in our small family unit. She had shoulder-length auburn hair, always styled perfectly, and wore soft pastel sweaters that made her seem approachable and maternal. Patricia arrived at our house with homemade chocolate chip cookies still warm from her oven. She planned family movie nights, selecting films she claimed would help us bond as a unit. She taught me to braid my hair in intricate patterns, something my mother never had time to show me. Patricia listened when I complained about difficult teachers and seemed genuinely interested in my dreams of becoming an architect someday. She brought her 6-year-old daughter Jessica to our weekend activities. Jessica had blonde curls and enormous blue eyes that made adults melt instantly. She was quiet and well-behaved, clinging to Patricia's side during those early visits. I felt protective toward this little girl who seemed so much younger than her actual age. For months, our expanding family felt natural and comfortable. Dad smiled more than he had since Mom died. Patricia filled our refrigerator with nutritious snacks and insisted on family dinners, where we shared highlights from our days. She helped me pick out clothes for school dances and promised to teach me to drive when I turned 15. But something felt wrong during those peaceful months, though I could not identify the source of my unease. Patricia asked too many questions about our family finances, wondering aloud about Dad's business income and our savings account balances. She commented frequently about our house's prime location and rising property values in our neighborhood. One afternoon, while searching for a missing textbook in my bedroom, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Hidden behind my dresser, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a tiny recording device no bigger than a quarter. The small red light blinked steadily, indicating it was actively recording every conversation in my private space. My hands trembled as I carefully extracted the device, examining its professional quality and expensive appearance. This was not some toy or accident. Someone had deliberately placed sophisticated surveillance equipment in my bedroom, violating my privacy in the most invasive way imaginable. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Patricia had been gathering intelligence about our family, recording my private phone calls with friends, documenting my conversations with Dad, and collecting ammunition for some future purpose I could not yet understand. The warm, nurturing woman who baked cookies and braided my hair was actually a calculating stranger who had infiltrated our lives with deliberate intent. I stared at the recording device, understanding that everything I believed about our blended family was built on deception. Patricia was not the loving stepmother she pretended to be. She was something far more dangerous, and I had no idea how to protect Dad from whatever she was planning. Patricia and Dad married in a small ceremony at the courthouse when I turned 14, with Jessica and me serving as the only witnesses. Patricia wore a cream-colored dress and carried white roses, looking every bit the blushing bride starting a new chapter. Dad beamed with happiness, believing he was providing his daughter with the complete family she deserved. Immediately after the wedding, we moved into a larger house in Orange County that Patricia insisted would give us all more space to grow as a family. The new house was beautiful, with vaulted ceilings and a swimming pool, but the room assignments revealed Patricia's true priorities from the very beginning. Jessica received the spacious bedroom adjacent to the master suite, complete with an ensuite bathroom and walk-in closet. Her room overlooked the backyard pool area and received natural light throughout the day. Patricia decorated it with princess themes and expensive furniture, creating a paradise for a 7-year-old girl. Meanwhile, I was assigned to the converted basement room, which Patricia claimed would give me privacy and independence as a teenager. The basement stayed cold in winter and humid in summer, with a single small window that barely provided adequate light. The carpet smelled musty, and I could hear every footstep from the floors above, making sleep difficult on school nights. Patricia's favoritism became unmistakable in countless daily interactions. She packed elaborate lunches for Jessica with organic fruits and gourmet sandwiches, while providing me with basic peanut butter and jelly combinations. When Jessica needed new clothes, Patricia took her on shopping sprees to expensive department stores. When I needed school supplies, Patricia handed me $20 bills and told me to shop at discount stores. The most painful disparity involved our extracurricular activities. Patricia never missed one of Jessica's dance recitals, arriving early to secure front row seating and bringing professional cameras to document every performance. She volunteered to help with costume fittings and fundraising events for Jessica's dance studio. But Patricia consistently forgot about my volleyball games and track meets. She would claim scheduling conflicts or important errands prevented her attendance. When Dad asked why she missed my competitions, Patricia would sigh dramatically and explain that she supported my activities but could not be expected to attend everything for both girls. When I questioned this obvious double standard, Patricia became a master of gaslighting. She would look at me with wounded eyes and claim I was being jealous and ungrateful toward my little sister. She insisted that Jessica needed more attention because she was younger and adjusting to a new family situation, while I should be mature enough to understand these priorities. Patricia convinced Dad that my complaints about unfair treatment were signs of adolescent rebellion and jealousy. She would pull him aside for private conversations, explaining that teenage girls often struggled with sharing parental attention, and that my behavior was perfectly normal. Dad, who had no experience with teenage daughters or blended families, accepted Patricia's expert guidance without question. The psychological manipulation became more sophisticated as months passed. Patricia would ask me to help with household chores, then criticize my efforts as inadequate compared to how Jessica might have completed the same tasks. She would suggest family activities that catered exclusively to Jessica's interests, then act surprised when I showed little enthusiasm for princess movies or ballet performances. During my sophomore year of high school, I maintained excellent grades while working part-time at the bookstore to save money for college applications. I spent hours researching scholarship opportunities and planning my academic future, dreaming of studying architecture at UC Berkeley or UCLA. But Patricia began undermining my educational goals in ways so subtle that I almost missed them entirely. I would find my scholarship application deadlines mysteriously deleted from the family calendar. Important college information packets would disappear from our mail pile. When I asked Patricia if she had seen these materials, she would claim ignorance and suggest that I was probably mistaken about the dates or requirements. One evening, while using the family computer to work on college essays, I discovered something that confirmed my worst suspicions about Patricia's true nature. Hidden in the computer's recently deleted files, I found multiple versions of my scholarship essays that had been deliberately sabotaged. Paragraphs had been scrambled, spelling errors had been introduced, and entire sections had been deleted. Patricia had been systematically destroying my chances for college admission and financial aid, ensuring that my academic future would suffer, while Jessica's path remained clear and unobstructed. She was not content with simply favoring her biological daughter. She was actively sabotaging my opportunities to succeed independently. The realization that my stepmother was deliberately attacking my future filled me with a cold rage that scared me. Patricia was not just neglectful or insensitive. She was malicious, calculating, and determined to eliminate me as competition for family resources and attention. I printed copies of the sabotaged essays as evidence, hiding them in my school locker where Patricia could not find them. But I had no idea how to convince Dad of what was happening. Patricia had spent 2 years positioning herself as a reasonable adult while painting me as a jealous teenager. Any accusations I made would sound exactly like the complaints Patricia had trained him to dismiss. By my junior year, I had developed a routine that kept me away from home as much as possible. I worked 25 hours per week at Riverside Books, a cozy independent bookstore owned by Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, an elegant woman in her 60s who treated me with more respect than I received at home. Eleanor recognized my work ethic and academic potential, often encouraging me to pursue my architectural dreams despite the obstacles I faced. My job provided escape from Patricia's constant criticism and the uncomfortable family dynamics that dominated our household. I earned enough money to pay for my own school supplies, clothes, and college application fees, determined to achieve independence despite Patricia's efforts to undermine my success. I maintained a careful budget, tracking every dollar I earned and saved. My financial discipline impressed Eleanor, who often commented on my maturity and responsibility. I purchased used textbooks instead of new ones, packed my own lunches, and avoided unnecessary expenses that might drain my college fund. Despite my frugal habits, Patricia began making strange comments about my expensive tastes and selfish spending habits during family dinners. She would examine my new school notebooks or pencils with exaggerated surprise, wondering aloud how I could afford such luxuries on a part-time salary. When I wore a new sweater I had bought with my own money, Patricia would make pointed remarks about teenagers who spent carelessly while their families struggled with household expenses. These comments confused me because I knew exactly how little I spent on personal items. Every purchase was carefully considered and budgeted. I kept detailed records of my earnings and expenses, proudly showing Dad my growing savings account balance when he asked about my financial responsibility. But Patricia's criticisms began affecting Dad's perception of my character. He started questioning my spending decisions and suggesting that I should contribute more to household expenses instead of saving for college. When I explained that my savings were intended for educational purposes, Dad would nod approvingly, but I could see doubt creeping into his expression. Patricia's manipulation became more sophisticated as she convinced Dad that my work schedule was affecting my family obligations. She complained that I missed too many family dinners and spent too little time bonding with Jessica. When I explained that my job was essential for building my college fund, Patricia would sigh sadly and suggest that family relationships should take priority over financial goals. The pressure intensified when Patricia began questioning my academic performance. Despite my consistent honor roll achievements, she would express concern that working too many hours was compromising my studies, even though my grades remained excellent. Her fake worry felt suffocating and manipulative. During the spring of my junior year, strange financial irregularities began appearing in our household. Patricia claimed that money was missing from her purse on several occasions, always small amounts that could easily be misplaced or miscounted. She would search through couch cushions and car seats, acting puzzled about where these amounts could have disappeared. Initially, Dad dismissed these incidents as normal household confusion. Money gets moved around. Bills get paid from different accounts, and tracking small amounts becomes complicated in busy families. But Patricia persisted in her concerns, documenting each missing amount and expressing worry about the pattern. She began leaving her purse in obvious locations throughout the house, almost as if testing whether the money would disappear. When $20 went missing from her wallet, after she left it on the kitchen counter, Patricia became genuinely distressed, crying to Dad about feeling violated and unsafe in their own home. I had no idea that Patricia was orchestrating an elaborate setup designed to frame me for theft. While I focused on schoolwork and my job, she was carefully constructing false evidence that would destroy my relationship with Dad and justify removing me from their lives permanently. The most devastating aspect of Patricia's plan involved identity theft on a scale I could not have imagined. Using her accesses to personal information through her dental office position, Patricia had been forging documents and opening credit accounts in my name. She created a sophisticated paper trail that made it appear I had been stealing money and making unauthorized purchases for months. Patricia used her professional knowledge of document forgery to create false identification papers bearing my name. She opened credit cards and store accounts using these fraudulent documents, then made expensive purchases that she claimed were evidence of my secret spending addiction. The credit card statements showed thousands of dollars in charges for jewelry, electronics, and luxury items that Patricia stored in her own bedroom. But the false documentation made it appear that I had been the one making these purchases using stolen money and forged signatures to fund an elaborate deception. Patricia timed her plan perfectly, waiting until I was completely focused on college preparation and had no time to monitor financial accounts I did not even know existed. She created an entire false identity theft scenario with me as the primary suspect, building evidence that would soon convince Dad that his daughter had betrayed his trust in the most fundamental way possible. The trap was nearly complete, and I remained completely unaware of the destruction that was about to engulf my entire world. The explosion came on a Tuesday evening in late May during what I thought would be an ordinary family dinner. Patricia had prepared Jessica's favorite meal of chicken tenders and mashed potatoes while I quietly ate the leftovers from the previous night's dinner. The atmosphere felt unusually tense, with Dad seeming distracted and Patricia wearing an expression I could not quite interpret. After Jessica finished eating and went upstairs to complete her homework, Patricia dramatically placed her hands over her face and began sobbing. Dad immediately moved to comfort her, asking what was wrong and whether someone had hurt her. Through her tears, Patricia explained that $2,000 was missing from her personal savings account. The money, she claimed, had been carefully saved over months for Jessica's upcoming Sweet 16 party. Patricia had been planning an elaborate celebration with professional decorating, catered food, and live entertainment. She had been so excited about creating magical memories for Jessica that losing this money felt like devastating personal failure. Patricia described discovering the missing funds that morning when she checked her bank balance online. She had counted and recounted the account activity, becoming increasingly panicked as she realized that someone had been systematically withdrawing money from her account over several weeks. Dad listened with growing concern, asking practical questions about bank security and potential fraud. But Patricia tearfully redirected the conversation toward suspicious activity she had noticed within our own household. She claimed to have seen me near her purse on multiple occasions, always with convenient explanations about looking for tissues or chapstick. Then Patricia delivered the crushing blow that changed everything. She had found expensive jewelry hidden in my bedroom while looking for laundry that morning. Diamond earrings, a gold bracelet, and a designer necklace were tucked away in my dresser drawer items, far beyond what I could afford on my bookstore salary. Dad's expression shifted from concern to confusion as Patricia led him upstairs to my basement bedroom. I followed in stunned silence, completely bewildered by accusations that made no logical sense. I had never stolen money from anyone, and I certainly had never hidden jewelry in my room. But there in my dresser drawer, exactly where Patricia claimed to have found them, were 3 pieces of expensive jewelry that I had never seen before in my entire life. The items were clearly valuable with professional packaging and price tags, indicating costs in the hundreds of dollars range. Dad held the jewelry with shaking hands, staring at me with an expression of betrayal and disappointment that broke my heart. I tried to explain that I had no idea how these items ended up in my room, that someone else must have placed them there without my knowledge. Patricia produced additional evidence that destroyed any credibility I might have retained. She showed Dad bank statements from her savings account, highlighting withdrawal dates that corresponded with times when I had been home alone or had access to her personal belongings. But the final nail in my coffin came when Patricia revealed credit card statements bearing my name and forged signature. The documents showed thousands of dollars in charges for luxury items, electronics, and expensive clothing purchases made over several months. According to these statements, I had been running a sophisticated identity theft operation while pretending to be a responsible teenager, saving for college. Dad examined the credit card statements with growing horror, recognizing what appeared to be my signature on purchase receipts for items worth more than I earned in 6 months of part-time work. The evidence looked absolutely convincing to someone who trusted his wife and had no reason to suspect an elaborate frame-up. I begged Dad to believe me, explaining that I had never applied for credit cards or made these purchases. I showed him my carefully maintained budget records and my actual bank account statements, demonstrating that every dollar I earned was accounted for and saved. But Patricia's false evidence was too sophisticated and convincing for my simple protests to overcome. Patricia claimed that she had been monitoring suspicious activity for weeks, hoping to prove her suspicions wrong. She described finding purchase receipts in my car and noticing that I had been receiving mail from credit card companies. She presented herself as a concerned stepmother who had tried to protect me from myself, but could no longer ignore evidence of serious criminal behavior. The confrontation lasted for over 2 hours, with me desperately trying to prove my innocence, while Patricia provided increasingly damaging evidence of my supposed crimes. Dad sat in my basement bedroom, surrounded by false documents and planted evidence, watching his relationship with his daughter disintegrate before his eyes. Patricia's performance was flawless. She cried at appropriate moments, expressing heartbreak that a teenager she loved like her own daughter could betray their family trust so completely. She worried aloud about Jessica's safety and wondered what other deceptions I might be hiding. By the end of the evening, Dad was convinced that I had been stealing money from Patricia's account, hiding expensive stolen merchandise in my room, and operating credit card fraud schemes using forged documents. The evidence was too overwhelming for him to consider any alternative explanation. The worst part was seeing the love and pride disappear from Dad's eyes as he stared at me across my bedroom. The man who had cheered at my volleyball games and helped with homework now looked at me like I was a stranger who had infiltrated his family to commit crimes against the people he loved most. I knew that my relationship with my father was over-destroyed by Patricia's calculated lies and forged evidence. But I had no idea that this was only the beginning of the devastation she had planned for my life. Dad's explosion of fury terrified me more than anything I had ever experienced in my 17 years of life. The man who had been my protector, my biggest supporter, and my closest friend transformed into someone I barely recognized. His face turned deep red with rage as he stood in my basement bedroom, clutching Patricia's fabricated evidence like weapons designed to destroy me. "How could you do this to us?" he screamed, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "How could you steal from Patricia and betray everything I taught you about honesty and integrity? I trusted you completely, Cecilia, and you have been lying to my face for months while robbing the woman who tried to love you like her own daughter." I dropped to my knees beside my bed, tears streaming down my cheeks as I begged him to listen to my side of the story. "Dad, please, you have to believe me. I would never steal from anyone, especially not from our family. Someone planted that jewelry in my room. I have never seen those credit cards before in my entire life. Please, just give me a chance to prove my innocence." But Dad was beyond reasoning. Patricia had spent 2 years poisoning his mind against me, convincing him that teenage girls were manipulative and that my protests of innocence were exactly the kind of lies that guilty people tell when confronted with evidence. She had prepared him for this moment, teaching him to dismiss my desperate denials as further proof of my dishonest character. "I gave you everything," Dad continued, his voice breaking with emotion. "After your mother died, I devoted my entire life to raising you properly. I worked extra hours to pay for your activities and education. I believed in your dreams and supported your goals. And this is how you repay me, by stealing from my wife and destroying our family's trust." Patricia stood behind Dad, watching my emotional breakdown with what I now recognize as satisfaction. She had orchestrated this scene perfectly, timing the revelation for maximum impact and ensuring that Dad's anger would be too intense for rational discussion. Occasionally, she would place a comforting hand on his shoulder or make soft sounds of sympathy, positioning herself as the wronged party who deserved his protection. Jessica appeared in the doorway, drawn by the shouting and chaos. She watched with wide blue eyes as her stepfather screamed at his biological daughter, probably confused by the violence of emotions she was witnessing. Patricia quickly shepherded Jessica away from the scene, murmuring about protecting her from family drama. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack your belongings and leave this house," Dad announced with cold finality. "I will not have a thief living under my roof stealing from the people who love her. You are no longer welcome in this family, Cecilia. You made your choices and now you have to live with the consequences." The words hit me like physical blows. 1 hour to pack 16 years of life into whatever bags I could carry. 1 hour to say goodbye to my bedroom, my books, my high school memorabilia, and everything that represented my childhood. 1 hour before becoming homeless with nowhere to go and no one to help me. I scrambled around my basement room, stuffing clothes into 2 large suitcases while Dad stood guard to ensure I did not steal anything else. My hands shook as I tried to decide which possessions were most important and which memories I would have to abandon forever. Photo albums with pictures of mom awards from school competitions, journals filled with my private thoughts and dreams. Patricia returned without Jessica, ostensibly to help supervise my packing, but actually to gloat over her victory. She watched as I folded my favorite sweaters and tried to fit my winter coats into already overflowing luggage. When I reached for my laptop computer, Patricia quickly intervened. "That computer was purchased with family money," she declared firmly. "You cannot take property that belongs to us, especially when we know you have been stealing from our accounts. Leave it here." I protested that the laptop contained my school projects and college application materials, but Dad supported Patricia's decision. Everything in the house belonged to them now, and I had forfeited any claim to family property through my supposed criminal behavior. I was allowed to take only clothes and personal items that could not be considered stolen goods. As my hour deadline approached, I made one final desperate attempt to reach my father's heart. Dad, I love you more than anything in the world. Please do not do this to us. Please give me a chance to prove that Patricia is lying about everything. She has been manipulating you since the day she moved into our lives. But mentioning Patricia's manipulation was the worst possible strategy. Dad's anger flared even hotter as he accused me of trying to destroy his marriage and turn him against the woman who had brought stability and love back into his life. From his perspective, I was now attacking the person who had stood by him while his own daughter betrayed their family trust. "Get out," he said quietly, his voice filled with pain and disgust. "Take your bags and get out of my house. I never want to see you again." Jessica appeared at the top of the basement stairs as I dragged my suitcases toward the door. She watched with what I initially interpreted as confusion, but now recognize as smugness. This 8-year-old girl had witnessed my destruction and felt satisfied by the removal of competition for her mother's attention and her stepfather's resources. I loaded my possessions into my beat-up Honda Civic the car Dad had helped me buy with money from my bookstore job. The irony was bitter. The only thing I owned that could provide shelter was something I had purchased with my own honestly earned wages, not the stolen money Patricia claimed I had been spending. That first night, I parked in the far corner of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot, curled up in my back seat with a pillow and blanket. The parking lot felt safer than trying to sleep on a random street, and the bright security lights provided some comfort against the terrifying reality of being completely alone in the world. I cried myself to sleep that night, still unable to fully comprehend how quickly my entire life had been destroyed. 17 years of love and trust with my father had been obliterated in a single evening by a woman who had spent 2 years carefully planning my destruction. But even as I grieved the loss of my family, part of my mind was already working to understand what had really happened. Patricia's setup had been too perfect, too sophisticated for a simple crime of opportunity. She had planned this destruction methodically, and I was beginning to realize that her motivations went far deeper than simple favoritism toward her biological daughter. The next morning, hiding in the school library before classes started, I overheard a phone conversation that confirmed my worst suspicions and gave me the first clue about Patricia's true identity. She was talking to someone about how the little brat finally got what she deserved, and discussing how they would split insurance claim proceeds once the paperwork processed. Patricia had not simply framed me for theft. She had orchestrated an elaborate insurance fraud scheme, and my banishment was just the first step in a much larger criminal operation that would ultimately cost my father everything he had worked his entire life to build. Living in my car while finishing high school required resourcefulness I never knew I possessed. Every morning, I would arrive at school early to shower in the girls' locker room before other students appeared. I kept a gym bag with toiletries, clean clothes, and basic grooming supplies in my trunk, rotating my wardrobe carefully to avoid obvious repetition. The hardest part was maintaining the pretense of normal teenage life while hiding my desperate circumstances from classmates and teachers. I could not afford to let anyone discover my homelessness, fearing that social services intervention might derail my education entirely. I had already lost my family and my home. I could not risk losing my chance to graduate and escape this nightmare through a college admission. My job at Riverside Books became my salvation in ways beyond simple income. The bookstore provided warmth during cold afternoons, bathroom facilities when school was closed, and Wi-Fi access for completing homework assignments. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson allowed me to stay late most evenings, organizing inventory and cleaning shelves while she balanced the daily receipts. Eleanor was a remarkable woman in her mid-60s, with silver hair always arranged in an elegant chignon and reading glasses hanging from a delicate gold chain. She had inherited the bookstore from her late husband and ran it with the passion of someone who truly loved literature and learning. Eleanor treated me with respect and kindness that I desperately needed during this traumatic period. Working extra hours became essential for survival. I needed money for gas to keep my car running, food that could be stored without refrigeration, and basic necessities like soap and shampoo. I survived on peanut butter sandwiches, granola bars, and cheap fast food that I could eat without cooking facilities. The physical discomfort of sleeping in my car was manageable compared to the emotional devastation of losing my father. Some nights I would drive past our Orange County house, seeing lights in the windows, and imagining the family dinners continuing without me. Dad and Patricia were probably relieved by my absence, finally able to enjoy their blended family without the problematic teenager disrupting their happiness. My grades began slipping as exhaustion and stress overwhelmed my ability to concentrate. Advanced placement classes that had once felt manageable became insurmountable challenges when I was struggling to find safe places to sleep and shower regularly. I had maintained a 4.0 grade point average before my banishment, but now I watched helplessly as my academic performance deteriorated. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed my declining performance and requested a private meeting. I sat in her office terrified that she would discover my living situation and trigger an investigation that would destroy my remaining chances for independence. Cecilia, your teachers are concerned about the changes in your academic work, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. You have always been one of our most dedicated students, but your recent assignments show signs of stress and distraction. Is everything okay at home? I fabricated a story about family financial difficulties requiring me to work longer hours, which was technically true, though not complete. Mrs. Rodriguez accepted this explanation, but encouraged me to apply for hardship scholarships and consider community college options if university tuition became unaffordable. The conversation planted an idea that would prove crucial to my survival. I researched legal emancipation requirements, discovering that California allowed teenagers to petition for independence under specific circumstances. The process required proving financial self-sufficiency and demonstrating that emancipation served my best interest. Applying for emancipation meant acknowledging that my relationship with Dad was permanently destroyed, but I had already lost any hope of reconciliation. Patricia's control over him was complete, and my desperate letters attempting to explain the truth went unanswered. Emancipation would at least provide legal independence and access to financial aid programs designed for students without parental support. The legal process took months to complete, requiring court appearances and documentation of my living situation. I had to prove that I could support myself financially, maintain stable housing, and continue my education without parental assistance. The judge was initially skeptical about a 17-year-old's ability to manage these responsibilities independently. But my academic record, employment history, and carefully maintained financial records convinced the court that emancipation was appropriate. I became legally independent 3 months before my 18th birthday, officially severing the legal relationship with my father and stepmother. The paperwork felt both liberating and heartbreaking. Legal independence meant freedom from Patricia's manipulation, but it also meant accepting that Dad had chosen his new wife over his biological daughter. The little girl who had once been his pride and joy was now a legal stranger with no claim to his love or support. During my final months of high school, while battling paperwork and court appearances, something wonderful happened that changed the trajectory of my entire life. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson discovered my living situation through a series of small observations and gentle questions. Eleanor had noticed that I always volunteered to work late shifts and seemed reluctant to leave the bookstore each evening. She observed that I arrived at work with wrinkled clothes despite my obvious attention to personal grooming. When she offered to let me shower at her nearby apartment one evening, I broke down crying and confessed the whole story. Eleanor listened to my tale of betrayal and banishment without judgment or pity. She asked practical questions about my court case and graduation requirements, approaching my problems with the same methodical intelligence she applied to running her business. Celia, she said after hearing my complete story, I have a proposition that might benefit both of us. The apartment above the bookstore has been empty since my previous tenant moved to Seattle. It is small but comfortable with a kitchenette and bathroom. If you would be interested in managing the evening inventory and weekend operations, we could arrange a housing trade that would give you stability while providing me with reliable help. The offer felt like a miracle, a real apartment with running water, electricity, and privacy, steady employment with someone who respected my work ethic and academic goals. Most importantly, a chance to rebuild my life with dignity instead of simply surviving day to day. Eleanor's generosity provided more than just housing and employment. She became the maternal figure I had lost when Dad chose Patricia over me. Eleanor encouraged my college plans, helped me navigate financial aid applications, and provided the emotional support that made recovery possible. For the first time since my banishment, I had hoped that my future could be something better than merely escaping my past. The apartment above Riverside Books became my sanctuary and launching pad for rebuilding everything Patricia had destroyed. Eleanor had furnished it simply but comfortably with a queen-size bed, a small dining table, and built-in bookshelves that I filled with classics from the store's inventory. Large windows overlooked the main street of our downtown district, providing natural light and a sense of connection to the community I was beginning to call home. Eleanor's mentorship extended far beyond providing housing and employment. She possessed a sharp business mind and decades of experience managing investments and property acquisitions. During quiet evening hours, she taught me about financial planning, explaining concepts like compound interest, diversified portfolios, and real estate market analysis. Cecilia, she would say while we organized new book shipments, security comes from understanding how money works, not just from earning it. Your father's business success made him vulnerable to someone like Patricia because he never learned to protect his assets from manipulation. Eleanor helped me graduate high school with honors despite the chaos of my senior year. She drove me to graduation ceremonies, cheering louder than any parent when my name was called. I cried walking across that stage, knowing that Dad should have been there celebrating this achievement with me. Community college provided an affordable path toward my architectural dreams while allowing me to continue working at the bookstore. I enrolled in business administration and real estate courses, discovering that I had inherited Dad's entrepreneurial instincts along with Eleanor's analytical approach to investment opportunities. My professors at Orange Coast College recognized my dedication and maturity, often commenting that I approached assignments with unusual seriousness for someone my age. I maintained a perfect grade point average while working 30 hours per week, driven by determination to prove that Patricia's sabotage had not destroyed my potential. Eleanor encouraged me to pursue real estate licensing during my second year of community college. Property investment creates wealth in ways that hourly employment cannot match, she explained. You have the intelligence and work ethic to build something significant, but you need to understand how successful people leverage their assets. The real estate licensing process required months of study and examination, but Eleanor provided flexible work schedules that accommodated my course requirements. She connected me with established agents who were willing to mentor a young woman entering the competitive Southern California market. During this period of academic and professional growth, I began investigating Patricia's background more systematically. Something about her sophisticated manipulation techniques and elaborate fraud schemes suggested professional experience with identity theft and financial crimes. Using the research skills I had developed in college, I discovered public records indicating that Patricia Hughes had been married 3 times before meeting my father. Each previous marriage had ended in divorce under circumstances involving financial disputes and accusations of fraud. Court documents revealed patterns of behavior remarkably similar to what she had inflicted on my family. Patricia's first husband was a widowed contractor in San Diego with a teenage daughter who had been removed from his custody during their divorce proceedings. The daughter had been accused of stealing money from Patricia's purse and credit card fraud accusations that resulted in her placement in foster care while her father paid substantial alimony and child support. Her second husband was a widowed accountant in Los Angeles whose 16-year-old son had similarly been accused of theft and identity fraud. The son had been sent to military boarding school while Patricia gained control of the family's financial assets through community property laws. The third husband was a widowed veterinarian in Sacramento whose 15-year-old daughter had been removed from his home following accusations of stealing prescription medications and selling them at school. This daughter had been committed to juvenile rehabilitation facilities while Patricia collected insurance settlements related to the alleged crimes. The pattern was unmistakable and chilling. Patricia specifically targeted widowed men with teenage children, systematically alienating the biological children through false accusations, then collecting financial benefits while the fathers remained unaware of their manipulation. But my investigation revealed something even more disturbing about Jessica's true identity. Birth records and school enrollment documents contained inconsistencies that suggested Jessica might not be Patricia's biological daughter at all. Cross-referencing missing children databases with Jessica's approximate age and physical description, I found a case from Arizona involving a 6-year-old girl named Sarah Morrison who had disappeared during a custody exchange with her non-custodial mother. Sarah's father had been told his ex-wife and daughter died in a car accident, but no bodies were ever recovered. The missing child's photo bore an unmistakable resemblance to the Jessica I remembered from our brief time as stepsisters. Same blonde curls, same blue eyes, same petite bone structure. If my suspicions were correct, Patricia had not only destroyed my family through elaborate fraud schemes, she had also kidnapped another family's child and spent years brainwashing her into believing Patricia was her real mother. This revelation transformed my investigation from personal vindication into a potential rescue mission. If Jessica was actually Sarah Morrison, then she had a real father in Arizona who believed his daughter was dead. Patricia's crimes extended far beyond financial fraud into kidnapping and psychological abuse of an innocent child. Eleanor supported my investigation efforts, understanding that uncovering the truth about Patricia's criminal history was essential for my emotional healing and personal safety. She helped me contact private investigators and legal professionals who could pursue leads that required professional expertise and official authority. "You have been carrying tremendous anger about what that woman did to your family," Eleanor observed during one of our evening conversations. "But I believe you are going to discover that your father was not the first victim, and unfortunately, he will not be the last unless someone stops her permanently." By my 20th birthday, I had compiled a substantial file documenting Patricia's pattern of targeting vulnerable families. I had evidence of multiple identity fraud schemes, testimony from previous victims, and strong circumstantial evidence suggesting child kidnapping. What I still needed was irrefutable proof that would convince law enforcement to take action and convince my father that his wife was a professional criminal. The opportunity for that proof would come sooner than I expected, through circumstances that would test everything I had learned about resilience, justice, and the true meaning of family loyalty. My 21st birthday marked 5 years since Dad had thrown me out of his house, 5 years of rebuilding my life from nothing, while Patricia continued destroying everything he had worked to achieve. I celebrated quietly with Eleanor, who had become more than an employer or mentor. She was the mother I had chosen and who had chosen me in return. Eleanor surprised me with a gift that would prove instrumental in the next phase of my investigation. She had been secretly researching Patricia's criminal background through her own network of professional contacts, including retired police officers and private investigators who had become regular customers at the bookstore. "Cecilia," Eleanor said, presenting me with a thick folder tied with a blue ribbon. "I believe you are ready for the complete truth about what happened to your family. But I want you to understand that knowledge carries responsibility. Once you know everything, you will have to decide whether you are strong enough to seek justice." The folder contained professional investigative reports documenting Patricia's criminal activities across multiple states over nearly 2 decades. She was not simply an opportunistic fraud artist targeting vulnerable widowers. She was a sophisticated con artist, operating an organized criminal enterprise with accomplices and systematic methods. Patricia's real name was Patricia Ann Castellanos, and she had been under investigation by federal authorities for identity theft, mail fraud, insurance fraud, and suspected human trafficking. Her dental hygienist credentials were legitimate, but she used her professional access to patient information for gathering intelligence about potential targets. The federal investigation had been ongoing for 3 years, but lacked sufficient evidence for prosecution. Patricia was extremely careful about maintaining plausible deniability and ensuring that her victims appeared to be voluntary participants in financial transactions. Her methods were so sophisticated that most victims never realized they had been systematically robbed until years after the relationships ended. But the most shocking revelation involved Jessica's true identity and the scope of Patricia's crimes against children. The private investigator Eleanor had hired confirmed my suspicions about Jessica actually being Sarah Morrison, the missing child from Arizona. DNA evidence from hair samples I had provided proved that Jessica was definitely not Patricia's biological daughter. Sarah Morrison's case was one of at least 4 known child abductions Patricia had orchestrated over the past 15 years. She specifically targeted children during custody disputes, convincing one parent that their child had died in accidents, while actually taking the children to begin new lives under assumed identities. Patricia's method involved befriending women going through difficult divorces, offering emotional support and practical assistance with custody arrangements. When opportunities arose for unsupervised visits or overnight stays, Patricia would stage fake accidents or kidnappings, providing false death certificates and cremation documents to convince the custodial parents that their children had been killed. She would then move the kidnapped children to different states, change their names and appearances, and integrate them into her own criminal operations as supposed biological daughters. These children became both victims and unwitting accomplices, programmed to support Patricia's cover stories while having no memory of their real families. The investigative reports included testimony from Patricia's previous accomplices who had been arrested for unrelated crimes and agreed to cooperate with federal authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. These testimonies describe Patricia's recruitment methods, her training techniques for manipulating kidnapped children, and her systematic approach to financial fraud. According to these witnesses, Patricia had been planning to abandon my father and disappear with his assets once Jessica turned 18 and could legally participate in more sophisticated fraud schemes. My banishment had been scheduled to coincide with Patricia's final asset liquidation phase, when she would convince Dad to transfer property and business ownership into Jessica's name for supposed tax advantages. Eleanor's folder also contained evidence that Patricia was already preparing her exit strategy. She had been secretly liquidating Dad's business assets, transferring money to offshore accounts, and establishing false identities that would allow her and Jessica to disappear completely once they had extracted maximum value from my father's wealth. Cecilia, Eleanor said gently, your father is not just a victim of manipulation, he is in serious danger. Patricia's previous targets have ended up financially ruined, emotionally destroyed, and in some cases dead under suspicious circumstances. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. I had spent 5 years focusing on my own recovery and academic success, assuming that Dad had made his choice and would have to live with the consequences. But learning the scope of Patricia's criminal enterprise made me realize that he was not a willing participant in betraying me. He was another victim of a predator who specialized in destroying families. I also felt responsible for Sarah Morrison, the little girl I had known as Jessica. She had no idea that her real father was alive and searching for her, or that the woman she called Mother was actually her kidnapper. Sarah deserved to know her true identity and have the opportunity to reclaim her real family. But pursuing justice against Patricia required risking everything I had built during my years of recovery. Confronting a professional criminal with federal law enforcement connections was dangerous. Patricia had successfully evaded prosecution for 2 decades by eliminating witnesses and destroying evidence. She would not hesitate to target me if she realized I possessed information that could expose her operations. Eleanor understood my fear but encouraged me to consider the broader implications of remaining silent. How many more families will she destroy if no one stops her? How many more children will be kidnapped and brainwashed? Your father may be her current victim, but he will not be her last. The private investigator who had compiled the reports offered to help me develop a strategy for approaching federal authorities. Special Agent Maria Santos of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division had been investigating Patricia for 3 years and would be interested in any evidence that could finally build a prosecutable case. Agent Santos explained that Patricia's sophisticated methods made traditional investigation techniques ineffective. She rarely left direct evidence, and her victims were usually too ashamed or confused to provide useful testimony. What the FBI needed was someone with inside knowledge of Patricia's current operations and access to her personal communications. Ms. Thompson, Agent Santos said during our confidential meeting, you are uniquely positioned to help us gather evidence that could not only bring Patricia to justice, but also rescue the children she has kidnapped and prevent future crimes. However, I want you to understand that this investigation will require tremendous courage and personal risk. The agent outlined a plan that would involve me reestablishing contact with my father and Patricia under the pretense of seeking reconciliation. I would need to wear recording devices, gather documentary evidence, and potentially testify in federal court about everything I had witnessed during my time in their household. The plan was terrifying but necessary. Patricia had stolen my childhood, destroyed my relationship with my father, and continued victimizing other families while I focused on rebuilding my own life. Justice required that I confront the woman who had nearly destroyed me using everything I had learned during my years of survival and recovery. Eleanor supported my decision to cooperate with the federal investigation, but she insisted on providing backup security and emergency resources. You are not fighting this battle alone, Cecilia. We will protect you, and we will succeed. Eleanor's death came suddenly and peacefully during my final semester at community college, transforming grief into an unexpected foundation for everything that would follow. She suffered a heart attack while reading in her favorite armchair at the bookstore, surrounded by the books and memories that had defined her gentle existence. I found her the next morning when she failed to open the store at her usual 8 o'clock start time. She looked serene with her reading glasses still perched on her nose and a book of poetry open in her lap. Even in death, Eleanor maintained the dignity and grace that had made her such a powerful influence on my recovery and growth. The funeral service filled our small downtown church with customers, employees, and community members whose lives Eleanor had touched through her generosity and wisdom. I delivered the eulogy, describing how she had rescued a homeless teenager and provided not just employment and housing, but the maternal love and guidance that had made my survival possible. But Eleanor's most profound gift came through her will, which she had updated recently without telling me about the changes. She left me the bookstore, the building that housed it, and a substantial investment portfolio that she had been quietly building for decades through careful real estate purchases and stock market investments. The inheritance totaled nearly $200,000 in amount that seemed impossible for a small bookstore owner to accumulate. Eleanor's financial advisor explained that she had been an exceptionally savvy investor who lived modestly while building wealth through compound returns and strategic property acquisitions. "Mrs. Thompson spoke about you frequently," the advisor told me during our meeting to review the estate documents. "She said you reminded her of herself at your age, and she wanted to ensure you would have the resources to build something significant with your life." But the most shocking revelation came with a letter Eleanor had left specifically for me to be opened only after her death. The letter revealed a connection to my family that explained her extraordinary kindness and generosity during my darkest period. Eleanor Thompson had been my mother's roommate and closest friend during their college years at USC. They had maintained their friendship through marriages, careers, and the challenges of adult life. Eleanor had been present at my birth and had served as my unofficial godmother during the early years of my life. When my mother died in the car accident, Eleanor had wanted to help raise me, but Dad's grief and his need to maintain independence had prevented her from playing a larger role in my life. She had been quietly monitoring my well-being from a distance, waiting for an opportunity to provide support without interfering with Dad's parental responsibilities. "I promised your mother that I would watch over you if anything ever happened to her," Eleanor's letter explained. "When you appeared at my bookstore as a homeless teenager, I knew that God had finally given me the chance to honor that promise. You have been the daughter I never had, and I hope I have been able to provide some measure of the love and guidance your mother would have given you." The letter also revealed that Eleanor had been investigating Patricia's background since our first conversation about my banishment. She had suspected that my stepmother's behavior indicated professional criminal experience, and her research had provided the foundation for the federal investigation that was now moving forward. "Use this inheritance to build the life your mother dreamed for you," Eleanor concluded, "but more importantly, use it to ensure that Patricia never destroys another family the way she destroyed yours." With Eleanor's inheritance and business expertise, I expanded beyond simple property management into development and renovation projects. I purchased distressed properties in our downtown area, renovating them into affordable housing units and commercial spaces that revitalize the entire district. My architectural training from community college, combined with Eleanor's business mentoring, created opportunities I had never imagined possible. By age 25, I owned 8 rental properties and had developed a reputation for quality renovation work that respected historical character while incorporating modern conveniences. The most satisfying purchase was a beautiful 4-bedroom Victorian house just 3 streets from Dad's Orange County neighborhood. The house required extensive renovation, but it possessed the architectural details and craftsmanship that made restoration work deeply rewarding. I spent 2 years transforming that house into a showcase of period-appropriate restoration combined with contemporary living features. Hand-refinished hardwood floors, restored original moldings, and a completely rebuilt kitchen that maintained the home's historical integrity while providing modern functionality. The finished house represented everything I had accomplished through resilience education and Eleanor's mentorship. It was proof that Patricia's attempts to destroy my future had failed completely. I had not just survived her betrayal, but had thrived beyond anything she could have imagined. But the house also served a strategic purpose in my ongoing collaboration with the FBI investigation. Agent Santos had suggested that establishing visible success in my father's neighborhood would eventually draw Patricia's attention and provide opportunities for renewed contact. Criminals like Patricia are always monitoring their previous victims, Agent Santos explained. When she realizes that you have become wealthy, despite her efforts to destroy you, her greed and curiosity will motivate her to make contact. She will want to know how you achieve success and whether you might be vulnerable to new schemes. The agent's prediction proved accurate sooner than expected. Within months of completing my house renovation, Dad began asking mutual acquaintances about my circumstances and achievements. Patricia was clearly gathering intelligence about my financial success and wondering whether I might be approachable for reconciliation. I knew that my years of preparation were about to be tested. Patricia would eventually approach me with some scheme designed to exploit my success while appearing to heal our family wounds. When that moment came, I would be ready with recording devices, documentary evidence, and federal law enforcement support. But I also knew that confronting Patricia would require reliving the trauma of my teenage years and risking everything I had built during my recovery. Eleanor's legacy had given me the resources to seek justice, but succeeding would require courage that I was still building one day at a time. The little girl who had been thrown out of her father's house was now a successful businesswoman with the power to bring down the criminal who had destroyed her family. Justice was finally within reach, but achieving it would demand everything I had learned about strength, strategy, and the true meaning of family loyalty. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday evening in March, 12 years after Dad had ordered me out of his house with nothing but 2 suitcases and a broken heart. I was reviewing renovation plans for my latest property acquisition when my cell phone rang with a number I recognized but had not seen in over a decade. "Hello, Cecilia." Dad's voice sounded older, more tired than I remembered. "This is your father. I hope you do not mind me calling you after all these years." My hands trembled as I held the phone, memories flooding back of the man who had once been my hero and protector. He sounded hesitant, almost nervous, completely different from the confident businessman who had dominated my childhood recollections. "Dad?" I managed to say, keeping my voice steady despite the emotional chaos his call had triggered. "This is unexpected. How did you get my number?" "I asked around the neighborhood," he admitted. "People have been talking about your success with the real estate business, and I heard you bought that beautiful Victorian house on Maple Street. I drive by sometimes and see the restoration work you have done. It looks incredible, Cecilia. You always had such talent for design." The compliment felt like a knife twisting in an old wound. Where had this pride and recognition been when I desperately needed his support as a teenager? But I reminded myself that Agent Santos had predicted this contact, and I needed to approach the conversation strategically rather than emotionally. "Thank you," I replied carefully. "I have been fortunate to build something meaningful here." Dad cleared his throat nervously before continuing. "Cecilia, I know we have not spoken in many years, and I understand that you might not want to hear from me, but I was hoping we might be able to meet somewhere neutral and talk. I have been thinking about our family situation, and I believe it might be time to try healing some of the wounds between us." The irony was staggering. Dad wanted to heal wounds that he had inflicted by choosing to believe Patricia's lies over his own daughter's desperate pleas for understanding. But I also recognized that this contact represented the opportunity Agent Santos and I had been waiting for. I suppose we could meet for coffee. I agreed, suggesting a public restaurant near my neighborhood. Though, I have to say I am curious about what has prompted this sudden interest in reconciliation after 12 years of silence. Things have been difficult lately. Dad admitted, his voice carrying a weight of exhaustion that suggested serious problems. Patricia and I are facing some financial challenges, and Jessica is expecting her first baby. I realize that family becomes more important when you are dealing with significant stress. The mention of financial difficulties confirmed what Agent Santos had suspected about Patricia's exit strategy. She was probably in the final stages of liquidating Dad's assets before disappearing with Jessica and their stolen wealth. We arranged to meet the following Saturday afternoon at a quiet cafe in downtown Riverside. I spent the intervening days preparing emotionally for seeing Dad again while reviewing strategy with Agent Santos about how to handle the conversation. Remember that your father is a victim, not a willing accomplice. Agent Santos reminded me during our briefing. Patricia has been manipulating him for 15 years. He genuinely believes that you betrayed the family, and he has no idea that his wife is a professional criminal. The agent fitted me with a small recording device that would capture our conversation for evidence purposes. We need him to reveal details about their current financial situation and Patricia's recent activities. Try to get him talking about Jessica's pregnancy and any changes in their household routine. Saturday afternoon arrived with spring sunshine that made the downtown cafe feel warm and welcoming. I arrived early, choosing a corner table that would provide privacy while allowing the recording device to capture clear audio. My heart raced as I watched the entrance, waiting for the first glimpse of my father in over a decade. Dad appeared exactly on time, looking significantly older than his 58 years. His hair had gone completely gray, and he had lost considerable weight in ways that suggested stress, rather than healthy lifestyle changes. He wore a rumpled polo shirt and khakis that seemed expensive but showed signs of extended wear. Cecilia," he said softly, approaching the table with obvious nervousness. "You look wonderful. Success clearly agrees with you." I stood to greet him, unsure whether physical contact was appropriate after so many years of estrangement. Dad solved the dilemma by pulling me into a brief, awkward hug that felt like embracing a stranger who happened to resemble someone I had once loved deeply. We ordered coffee and spent several minutes exchanging superficial updates about health, weather, and local news. Dad seemed genuinely interested in my business success, asking detailed questions about property acquisition and renovation techniques. For brief moments, he sounded like the father who had encouraged my architectural dreams during happier times. But the conversation's underlying purpose became clear when Dad began discussing his current circumstances with obvious discomfort. Patricia's dental practice has been struggling since the new corporate clinic opened across town. Her patient base has declined significantly, and we have been dealing with some unexpected expenses related to Jessica's pregnancy. I encouraged him to elaborate, maintaining sympathetic interest, while internally noting how Patricia had probably been using practice closure as cover for liquidating assets and preparing to disappear. Jessica is having some complications that require specialized medical care, Dad continued. We want to ensure she has access to the best possible treatment, but our insurance coverage has some limitations. Patricia thinks we might need to consider selling the house to cover the medical expenses. The house that Dad had worked 30 years to purchase and maintain, where he had planned to enjoy retirement and watch his grandchildren grow up. Patricia was convincing him to liquidate his primary asset under the guise of medical necessity. That sounds like a difficult decision, I said carefully. Have you considered other options for financing Jessica's medical care? Dad's expression grew more strained as he explained their limited alternatives. My business has not recovered from some poor investment decisions Patricia encouraged me to make several years ago. We sold most of our retirement savings trying to keep things afloat, and now we are facing some serious financial pressures. Poor investment decisions that Patricia had encouraged. Classic financial manipulation designed to transfer wealth into accounts that she controlled while making Dad believe the losses resulted from his own choices. I hate to ask this, Cecilia, especially considering our complicated history, Dad said, his voice dropping to an embarrassed whisper, but I was wondering if you might be willing to help us during this difficult time. I know we have not been close, but family should support each other when facing serious challenges. There it was, the approach Agent Santos had predicted. Patricia had sent Dad to test my willingness to provide financial assistance, probably hoping to evaluate my assets and determine whether I might be vulnerable to more sophisticated schemes. What kind of help are you thinking about? I asked, maintaining neutral curiosity while the recording device captured every word. Well, you have clearly done very well with your business ventures, Dad said, obviously rehearsing words Patricia had prepared for him. And you do not have children or a spouse to support. Perhaps you might consider letting us stay with you temporarily while we sort out our housing situation, or maybe you could provide a loan to help with Jessica's medical expenses. The entitlement was breathtaking. After 12 years of silence and rejection, Dad felt comfortable asking me to house and financially support the people who had destroyed my teenage years and stolen my relationship with him. But I also recognized the desperation in his voice and the confusion in his eyes. He was a man who had been systematically manipulated and isolated by a professional criminal. Patricia had probably convinced him that approaching me was his idea, that family reconciliation was the natural solution to their manufactured financial crisis. Dad, I said gently, these are significant requests to make after so many years of no contact. I need to think about whether I am comfortable reopening our relationship under these circumstances. Of course, he said quickly. I understand this is sudden, and I know our past makes things complicated, but Patricia thinks it might be good for all of us to try rebuilding our family connections. She feels terrible about the misunderstandings from when you were younger. Misunderstandings. Patricia's elaborate frame-up and my subsequent banishment were now being characterized as misunderstandings that could be resolved through family reconciliation and financial assistance. I agreed to consider his requests and promised to contact him within a few days with my decision. Dad seemed relieved that I had not immediately rejected his approaches, probably believing that Patricia's strategy was working perfectly. After he left, I sat in the cafe reviewing the conversation and its implications. Dad was clearly in serious financial trouble, probably much worse than he realized. Patricia was positioning herself to make final asset grabs before disappearing, and she was using Dad's desperation to manipulate him into approaching me. The recording device had captured everything we needed to document Dad's current circumstances and Patricia's manipulation techniques, but it had also confirmed that he remained completely under her psychological control, still believing that I had betrayed our family, rather than understanding that he had been the victim of elaborate criminal fraud. Agent Santos would be pleased with the evidence we had gathered, but I felt heartbroken seeing how completely Patricia had destroyed the man who had once been my beloved father. 3 days after my coffee meeting with Dad, Patricia took control of the situation with the brazen confidence that had characterized her manipulation techniques for over 15 years. She arrived at my house unannounced on Tuesday morning, bringing Jessica with her and acting as though family visits were completely normal despite our hostile history. I was reviewing architectural plans on my front porch when their silver sedan pulled into my driveway. Patricia emerged wearing a flowing maternity dress that emphasized Jessica's pregnancy bump, while Jessica herself looked tired and uncomfortable in the passenger seat. "Oh, Celia, darling," Patricia called out with false warmth, approaching my porch steps as though we were beloved relatives enjoying a surprise reunion. Your father told me about your wonderful conversation, and I simply had to come see this magnificent house you have created. Patricia had clearly coached Jessica for this visit because the young woman I remembered as a smug 8-year-old now smiled shyly and offered polite greetings about my business success. At 23, Jessica possessed the same blonde curls and blue eyes, but her expression carried a flatness that suggested years of psychological manipulation. Patricia, I replied, carefully activating the recording device I now carried whenever leaving my house. This is unexpected. Dad mentioned that Jessica was dealing with pregnancy complications, so I hope everything is progressing well. Oh, the doctors are optimistic, Patricia replied, guiding Jessica toward my front door with proprietary confidence. But we thought it would be lovely for Jessica to see the beautiful home her big sister has built. Family connections become so important when you are expecting your first child. The presumption was staggering. Patricia was treating my house as though she had every right to enter and inspect it while referring to me as Jessica's big sister, despite having destroyed our relationship when Jessica was a child. I reluctantly invited them inside, understanding that Agent Santos would want documentation of Patricia's behavior and demands. Patricia immediately began touring my living room with calculating eyes, commenting on furnishings, architectural details, and obvious signs of expensive renovation work. "This is absolutely gorgeous, Cecilia," Patricia enthused, running her fingers along my restored marble fireplace mantel. "The craftsmanship is museum quality, and the location is simply perfect. You must feel so proud of everything you have accomplished here." But her compliments carried an undercurrent of evaluation that made my skin crawl. Patricia was assessing my property's value and studying the layout with the intensity of someone planning future occupation. Jessica seemed overwhelmed by the house's grandeur, touching surfaces gently and asking tentative questions about renovation techniques. I found myself feeling genuinely sorry for this young woman who had no idea that her entire identity was built on lies and criminal behavior. "Jessica, why don't you rest in the living room while Cecilia and I have a little chat?" Patricia suggested, guiding me toward the kitchen with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling conversations and environments. Once we were alone, Patricia's demeanor shifted dramatically. The warm stepmother facade disappeared, replaced by the cold calculation that I remembered from my teenage years. She leaned against my granite countertop and studied me with predatory intensity. "Your father mentioned that you might be willing to help during our temporary financial difficulties," Patricia said, her voice carrying subtle threats beneath polite words. "I think it is wonderful that you want to support your family after all these years of separation." "I told Dad I would consider his requests," I replied carefully, "but I have not made any commitments about financial assistance or housing arrangements." Patricia's smile became sharper as she moved closer, invading my personal space in ways designed to intimidate and control. "Cecilia, I think we need to be realistic about family obligations and practical solutions to current challenges." She gestured toward my beautiful kitchen and spacious living areas with obvious covetousness. "You have built something magnificent here, but you live alone with no spouse or children to consider. Jessica is pregnant and needs stability during this crucial time. Your father is struggling financially despite working his entire life to support his family." The manipulation was breathtaking in its directness. Patricia was suggesting that my success created obligations to support the people who had banished me, and that my childless status made my property rights somehow less legitimate than their family needs. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, wanting to capture her demands on the recording device. "Well," Patricia said, settling into my kitchen chair as though she belonged there, "the most practical solution would be for you to sign this house over to Jessica. She needs a stable home for the baby, and you could easily purchase another property with your business income." The audacity was stunning. Patricia was demanding that I transfer ownership of my home to the stepdaughter who had watched smugly while I was thrown out of our family house as a teenager. That seems like an extreme request, I said, struggling to maintain composure while Patricia outlined her theft strategy. Not extreme at all, Patricia replied coolly. Jessica is family, and this baby will be your nephew or niece. Family comes first, Cecilia, especially when one family member has been blessed with abundance while others face genuine hardship. She produced legal documents from her purse clearly prepared for this conversation. I had these property transfer papers drawn up to simplify the process. All you need to do is sign them, and Jessica will have the security she needs for raising her child properly. I examined the documents with horror, realizing that Patricia had researched my property ownership and prepared sophisticated legal paperwork designed to steal my house through voluntary transfer. She had probably used similar documents to rob her previous victims. I need time to review these papers with my attorney, I said, stalling while the recording device captured her illegal demands. Of course, Patricia agreed, but her tone carried clear threats. Though I hope you will not delay too long. Jessica's medical situation requires immediate stability, and your father's financial pressures are becoming quite severe. She leaned closer, dropping her voice to the whisper I remembered from my teenage years. You know, Cecilia, people in this neighborhood have long memories. They remember the troubled teenager who stole from her family and broke her father's heart. It would be unfortunate if those old stories began circulating again, especially when your business reputation depends on community trust and respect. There it was. Patricia was threatening to destroy my professional reputation by spreading false stories about my supposed criminal background unless I surrendered my property to her demands. I would hate for your clients to question your honesty and integrity, Patricia continued with malicious satisfaction. Successful businesses require community confidence, and that confidence can be very fragile when people learn disturbing things about someone's past behavior. Jessica appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking uncomfortable with the conversation's obvious tension. Patricia immediately resumed her warm stepmother act, asking Jessica about her comfort level and suggesting they should return home so she could rest properly. Think about everything we have discussed, Cecilia, Patricia said while gathering her purse and legal documents. Family loyalty means making sacrifices for the people you love, even when those sacrifices feel difficult. As they prepared to leave, Patricia delivered her final threat with a smile that made my blood freeze. Your father loves you despite everything that happened in the past, but his health has been declining with all the stress he is facing. I would hate for family conflicts to worsen his condition unnecessarily. After they left, I sat in my kitchen reviewing what had just happened. Patricia had demanded that I sign over my house, threatened to destroy my business reputation, and implied that Dad's health problems might worsen if I refused to comply with her demands. But she had also provided exactly the evidence Agent Santos needed to document her criminal extortion attempts. The recording device had captured every threat, every manipulation technique, and every detail of her property theft scheme. Patricia's greed and desperation were making her reckless. She was moving too quickly and demanding too much, probably because her timeline for disappearing with Dad's assets was accelerating. I contacted Agent Santos immediately to report the encounter and schedule an emergency meeting. The investigation was reaching its culmination, and we needed to finalize our strategy for exposing Patricia's crimes before she could complete her destruction of my father's life. The little girl who had been thrown out for crimes she did not commit was finally ready to spring the trap that would bring her stepmother's criminal career to an end. Dad arrived at my house the following Saturday morning with the defeated posture of a man who had lost control of his own life. Patricia had clearly coached him for this final confrontation, but his body language suggested exhaustion and confusion rather than confidence in their shared strategy. Cecilia, he said heavily, standing in my front hallway like a stranger begging for charity. Patricia told me about her visit and the practical solutions she discussed with you. I hope you understand that we would not ask for help unless we were facing genuine crisis. I led him into my living room where Patricia waited with Jessica on my sofa as though they had every right to make themselves comfortable in my home. Patricia wore a designer dress that probably cost more than most people earned in a month, while claiming financial hardship that required stealing my property. Richard, sit down so we can finalize these arrangements. Patricia commanded, producing the property transfer documents from her expensive leather handbag. Cecilia has had time to consider our family's needs, and I am sure she wants to do the right thing for Jessica and the baby. The presumption that I had agreed to their demands revealed how completely Patricia controlled the narrative in their household. She had probably convinced Dad that my compliance was inevitable, that family pressure would overcome any resistance I might initially express. Before we discuss property transfers, I said calmly, walking toward my desk in the corner of the living room, I think there are some things about our family history that need to be clarified. I retrieved the manila folder that contained 5 years of investigative research, federal law enforcement reports, and documentary evidence that would destroy Patricia's carefully constructed lies. Agent Santos was positioned outside my house with backup units waiting for my signal to move in with arrest warrants. Cecilia, we are not here to rehash old family conflicts, Patricia interrupted sharply, recognizing potential threat in my controlled demeanor. We are here to solve practical problems and support Jessica's needs during her pregnancy. I agree completely, I replied, opening the folder to reveal photographs, bank records, and legal documents that Patricia had never expected me to possess. Let me show you some practical solutions to problems that go much deeper than financial difficulties. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as I placed the first photograph on my coffee table. It showed Patricia with her first husband in San Diego, standing beside a teenage girl who bore a remarkable resemblance to me at 16 years old. Patricia, I said quietly, I would like you to explain to Dad why your first stepdaughter was removed from her father's custody after being accused of the exact same crimes you claimed I committed. Patricia's face went completely white as she stared at evidence she thought had been destroyed years ago. I have no idea what you are talking about, Cecilia. Those documents are obviously forgeries designed to create problems for our family. I placed additional photographs on the table showing Patricia with her second and third husbands, along with the teenage children who had been systematically removed from their fathers' lives through false accusations of theft and fraud. Dad, I continued, maintaining steady eye contact with the man who had once been my hero. Patricia has been married 3 times before meeting you. Each marriage ended with her stepchildren being accused of stealing money and committing identity fraud. Each father believed his child had betrayed the family, and each father ended up financially ruined after the divorce proceedings. Dad picked up the photographs with trembling hands, studying faces and family groups that revealed an unmistakable pattern of systematic victimization. His breathing became shallow as the implications of what he was seeing began to penetrate his confusion. This is ridiculous, Patricia declared, rising from the sofa with aggressive body language designed to intimidate and control. These are obvious fabrications created by someone with serious mental health problems and an obsession with destroying our family. But I was just getting started. I placed bank records on the table that documented Patricia's sophisticated identity theft operations, showing how she had opened credit accounts in my name and made purchases that she later used as evidence of my supposed crimes. Here are the actual credit card applications with Patricia's real signature. I explained to Dad, who was studying the documents with growing horror. She forged my signature on these documents, made purchases with money she stole from your business accounts, then hid the merchandise in my bedroom as evidence of theft. Dad's hands shook as he compared Patricia's real signature with the forged versions that had convinced him of my guilt 12 years earlier. The handwriting analysis was conclusive. Patricia had fabricated every piece of evidence that led to my banishment. And here, I continued placing additional documents on the coffee table are the federal law enforcement reports documenting Patricia's criminal activities across multiple states for the past 20 years. The FBI reports contain details about Patricia's real identity, her previous victims, and the organized criminal enterprise she had been operating under various assumed names. Dad read through page after page of evidence that his wife was not a dental hygienist from Orange County, but a professional con artist who specialized in targeting widowed fathers. "Dad," I said gently, watching his world collapse as he absorbed the scope of Patricia's deception. "The woman you married is named Patricia Ann Castellanos, and she has been under federal investigation for identity theft, mail fraud, insurance fraud, and human trafficking." Patricia began backing toward my front door, recognizing that her elaborate cover was completely blown. "None of this is real, Richard. Cecilia is obviously mentally unstable and has created these fantasy documents to justify her criminal behavior and her hatred toward our family." But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. I placed DNA test results on the coffee table along with missing child reports from the Arizona Department of Public Safety. "Jessica," I said softly to the young woman who had been watching this confrontation with growing bewilderment, "your real name is Sarah Morrison. Patricia kidnapped you from your father when you were 6 years old after convincing him that you had died in a car accident." Jessica stared at the DNA results and missing child photographs with an expression of complete shock. The documents included pictures of her biological father, David Morrison, who had spent 17 years believing his daughter was dead, while actually living 3 states away under an assumed identity. "Your real father is a veterinarian in Phoenix," I continued, "and he has never stopped searching for you. Patricia convinced him that you and your mother died in an accident, but she actually kidnapped you during a custody exchange and brought you to California to serve as cover for her criminal operations." The silence in my living room was deafening as the complete scope of Patricia's crimes became clear. Dad sat surrounded by evidence that his wife was a professional criminal who had destroyed his relationship with his biological daughter while kidnapping someone else's child to use as a prop in her elaborate fraud schemes. Patricia made a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Richard, you cannot seriously believe these obvious lies. Cecilia has clearly spent years planning this elaborate revenge fantasy because she could never accept responsibility for her teenage crimes." But Dad was no longer listening to Patricia's manipulation. He was staring at Jessica with the horrified recognition that the child he had helped raise for 15 years was actually a kidnapping victim who belonged to another family. "Sarah," he whispered, using her real name for the first time in over a decade. "I am so sorry. I had no idea what Patricia had done to you or to my own daughter." I reached for my cell phone to signal Agent Santos that the confrontation had reached its climax. Patricia's criminal career was about to end, but the real work of healing and justice was just beginning. The weight of evidence spread across my coffee table created a silence so profound that I could hear Dad's labored breathing and Jessica's quiet sobs as she stared at photographs of her real father. Patricia stood frozen near my front door, probably calculating whether she could escape before law enforcement arrived. "Dad," I said gently, placing additional documents in his trembling hands, "there is more you need to understand about what Patricia has been doing to our family for the past 15 years. I showed him business records documenting how Patricia had been systematically liquidating his automotive parts distribution company, transferring assets to offshore accounts through shell corporations she controlled. The sophisticated paper trail revealed years of theft disguised as legitimate business decisions. Remember those investment opportunities Patricia encouraged you to pursue? I asked, watching comprehension dawn in his eyes. She convinced you to liquidate retirement savings and business equity to fund ventures that never existed. The money went directly into accounts she established for disappearing once Jessica turned 18. Dad examined bank statements and investment documents that revealed how Patricia had stolen nearly $300,000 from his business and personal accounts. She had presented false investment reports to convince him that market fluctuations explained his declining assets while actually transferring his wealth to her criminal associates. Your house is already scheduled for foreclosure next month. I continued showing him legal documents that Patricia had hidden from him. She took out multiple mortgages against the property without your knowledge, using forged power of attorney papers to access your equity. The foreclosure notices explained why Patricia had been pressuring me to transfer my property to Jessica. She needed replacement housing for her final exit strategy, and my beautiful Victorian house represented the perfect target for her last major theft. Jessica looked completely overwhelmed as she studied missing child reports and photographs of David Morrison, her biological father. I remember some things, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dreams about a different house, a man who read bedtime stories, a dog named Charlie. But Patricia always said those were fantasy memories from television shows. Patricia had spent 17 years systematically erasing Sarah Morrison's real identity, replacing genuine memories with false narratives that supported the kidnapping cover story. The psychological manipulation had been so thorough that Jessica barely remembered her life before Patricia stole her from her father. Your father never stopped searching for you, I told Jessica, showing her David Morrison's website dedicated to finding his missing daughter. He hired private investigators, worked with federal law enforcement, and maintained hope that you were alive somewhere. Patricia convinced him that you died in an accident, but he never accepted that explanation completely. Dad was reading through FBI reports with growing horror, finally understanding that his wife was not just a manipulative woman who favored her biological daughter. She was a sophisticated criminal who had infiltrated his family to rob him while simultaneously destroying his relationship with his real daughter. Cecilia, he said, his voice breaking with emotion, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. I chose to believe Patricia's lies instead of trusting my own daughter. I threw you out of our home for crimes you never committed while living with the real criminal for 15 years. The apology I had waited 12 years to hear felt both healing and heartbreaking. Dad finally understood the truth, but Patricia's manipulation had cost us both the family relationship we should have treasured and protected. Patricia made a final desperate attempt to control the narrative, probably hoping to buy time for escape or at least plant seeds of doubt about the overwhelming evidence against her. Richard, you are having an emotional reaction to sophisticated forgeries created by someone with serious mental health problems, she declared with the confident authority that had manipulated him for over a decade. Cecilia has clearly spent years obsessing over our family and creating these fantasy documents to support her delusions. But her manipulation techniques no longer worked. Dad was studying handwriting, analyses, DNA test results, and federal law enforcement reports that provided irrefutable proof of her criminal activities. The evidence was too comprehensive and professional for Patricia's gaslighting tactics to overcome. Patricia, Dad said quietly, standing up from my sofa with newfound strength and clarity. Stop lying. I can see the truth now, and I understand what you have done to all of us. Patricia's mask of concerned stepmother finally slipped, completely revealing the cold calculation that had always been her true nature. "You are both going to regret this," she hissed with genuine malice. "I have spent 15 years building a life with your family, and I will not allow it to be destroyed by some pathetic girl who could never accept that her father chose someone else." The threat contained an implicit confession that she viewed our family as property she had acquired and controlled, rather than relationships built on genuine love and trust. Patricia had never loved Dad or Jessica. We had all been assets in her criminal enterprise. Jessica was studying photographs of David Morrison with increasing recognition, apparently recovering memories that Patricia had tried to suppress. "I remember him," she said with growing certainty. "He taught me to ride a bicycle in our backyard. We had a garden where we grew tomatoes. There was a swing set by the big oak tree." Real memories were breaking through the psychological barriers Patricia had constructed to maintain her kidnapping deception. Sarah Morrison was beginning to remember her authentic identity and the father who had loved her before Patricia stole her away. I placed the final piece of evidence on my coffee table: recordings of Patricia's phone conversations discussing insurance fraud schemes with her criminal associates. The audio captured her laughing about how the little brat finally got what she deserved and planning to split the proceeds from forged insurance claims. "These recordings were made the morning after you threw me out of our house," I told Dad. "Patricia was celebrating the success of her plan to remove me from your life while discussing her strategy for stealing the insurance money she intended to collect." Dad listened to Patricia's voice expressing satisfaction about my homelessness and discussing criminal plans with co-conspirators he had never suspected existed. The recordings provided final confirmation that everything he had believed about our family was built on lies and calculated deception. The evidence was complete, and Patricia's criminal career was about to end. But the real work of healing and justice was just beginning as we prepared for the arrival of federal law enforcement agents who would finally hold her accountable for decades of victimizing innocent families. The sound of approaching sirens created a moment of perfect stillness in my living room, as though the entire universe was holding its breath before justice finally arrived. Patricia's eyes widened with genuine fear as she realized that my investigation had been coordinated with federal law enforcement authorities who were about to end her criminal career permanently. "Cecilia," she said desperately, abandoning all pretense of maternal concern, "whatever you think you have accomplished here, you are making a terrible mistake. I have connections and resources that you cannot imagine. This will not end the way you believe it will." But Agent Santos was already knocking on my front door, accompanied by a team of federal agents armed with arrest warrants and search authorizations. I opened the door to reveal the woman who had spent 3 years building a case against Patricia's organized criminal enterprise. Patricia Ann Castellanos. Agent Santos announced formally, "You are under arrest for federal charges including identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, kidnapping, and operation of a criminal enterprise across state lines." Patricia's mask of respectability crumbled completely as federal agents restrained her and began reading the extensive list of charges that had been building for over 2 decades. She screamed accusations about entrapment and false evidence, but her protests sounded hollow against the overwhelming documentation of her crimes. "Richard Thompson and Sarah Morrison." Agent Santos continued, "I am Special Agent Maria Santos with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are both victims of serious federal crimes, and we are here to begin the process of justice and recovery." Dad sat in stunned silence as additional agents entered my house to secure evidence and begin victim interviews. The scope of federal law enforcement response demonstrated how seriously they regarded Patricia's criminal activities and how many resources had been devoted to ending her 20-year crime spree. A victim services coordinator approached Jessica with gentle professionalism, explaining that she would receive comprehensive support for reuniting with her biological father and recovering from the psychological manipulation she had endured. David Morrison was already en route from Phoenix, having been notified that his daughter had been found alive and safe. "Ms. Morrison," the coordinator said softly, "your father has never stopped loving you or hoping for your return. He is going to need time to process everything that has happened, but he has been preparing for this moment for 17 years. Jessica nodded through her tears, still overwhelmed by the revelation that her entire identity had been built on lies and criminal deception. Patricia had stolen not just her childhood, but her understanding of who she was and where she belonged in the world. Agent Santos approached me with professional respect and personal gratitude. "Ms. Thompson, your cooperation has been essential for bringing Ms. Castellanos to justice and rescuing multiple victims of her criminal enterprise. Without your courage and persistence, she would have continued victimizing innocent families indefinitely." The federal investigation had uncovered at least 12 families that Patricia had targeted over 2 decades, stealing approximately $2 million and kidnapping 4 children who had been removed from their biological families through elaborate deception schemes. My father's case represented her most sophisticated and long-term operation. "What will happen to Patricia now?" Dad asked, his voice carrying exhaustion and defeat rather than anger. "She will face federal prosecution for dozens of charges related to organized criminal activity," Agent Santos explained. "Given the scope of her crimes and the number of victims involved, she is looking at a minimum sentence of 20 years in federal prison without possibility of parole." Patricia was loaded into a federal transport vehicle, still screaming threats and accusations about the supposed illegality of the investigation that had exposed her crimes. She continued insisting that she was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy, apparently unable to accept that her criminal career had finally been brought to an end. "Richard," Agent Santos said, "you should understand that you may face some legal consequences related to unknowingly benefiting from criminal proceeds. However, given your status as a victim of long-term manipulation, federal prosecutors are primarily interested in recovering stolen assets rather than pursuing criminal charges against you." Dad nodded numbly, probably realizing that everything he had believed about his life for the past 15 years had been carefully orchestrated deception. His business was gone, his house was facing foreclosure, and his marriage had been an elaborate criminal fraud designed to steal his wealth and destroy his relationship with his biological daughter. As the federal agents completed their evidence collection and victim interviews, I found myself alone with Dad for the first time since our hostile separation 12 years earlier. We sat in my living room, surrounded by the documents that had revealed the truth but destroyed what remained of his life. "Celia," he said quietly, "I know that my apology cannot undo the damage I caused by choosing to believe Patricia instead of trusting you. I destroyed our relationship and caused you tremendous suffering based on lies that I should have recognized." I looked at this broken man who had once been my hero and protector, understanding that he had been as much a victim of Patricia's manipulation as I had been. His crime had been trusting someone who specialized in exploiting trust, not maliciously choosing to hurt his daughter. "Dad," I replied gently, "Patricia spent 2 years preparing you to believe her lies and reject my truth. She is a professional criminal who specializes in psychological manipulation. You were not equipped to recognize her techniques or protect yourself from her deception. But forgiveness did not automatically restore our relationship. Too much damage had been done, too many years had been lost, and too much pain had been inflicted for simple apologies to heal completely. Patricia's destruction of our family would have lasting consequences that extended far beyond her criminal prosecution. I understand if you cannot forgive me, Dad continued, and I understand if you never want to see me again. But I want you to know that losing you has been the greatest regret of my entire life. Patricia may have manipulated me into making that choice, but I am the one who made it. The federal agents were finishing their work, preparing to transport evidence and complete victim interviews at their field office. Agent Santos approached us with information about next steps in the prosecution process and resources available for family counseling and financial recovery. The investigation will continue for several more months as we trace assets and identify additional victims, she explained. Ms. Castellanos has been operating criminal enterprises in multiple states, and federal prosecutors want to ensure that all charges are filed and all victims are identified. Justice was finally being served, but the real work of healing and recovery was just beginning for everyone whose lives Patricia had destroyed through her decades of criminal manipulation. 6 months after Patricia's arrest, I stood in the same courtroom where she received a 25-year federal prison sentence without possibility of parole. Judge Catherine Walsh described Patricia's crimes as a systematic pattern of psychological manipulation, financial fraud, and child exploitation that represents one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises this court has encountered. Patricia showed no remorse during her sentencing hearing, maintaining her claims of innocence and accusing everyone of participating in an elaborate conspiracy against her. Even facing decades in federal prison, she continued using manipulation techniques that had once destroyed entire families but now fell on deaf ears. The prosecution's victim impact statements revealed the staggering scope of Patricia's criminal career. 12 families had been systematically targeted and destroyed with total financial losses exceeding $3 million and psychological damage that would require years of therapy and recovery to address fully. Sarah Morrison, who was slowly reclaiming her authentic identity, chose not to attend the sentencing hearing. She was living in Phoenix with David Morrison, her biological father, working with trauma specialists to recover memories and rebuild relationships that Patricia had tried to destroy permanently. David Morrison had spoken with me several times during the months following Sarah's rescue, expressing gratitude that bordered on worship for my role in exposing Patricia's crimes and returning his daughter to him. "You gave me back my child," he said during one emotional phone conversation. "Sarah is everything I remembered and more. She is strong and intelligent and beautiful, despite everything that woman did to her." Sarah's pregnancy had progressed normally, despite the stress of discovering her true identity and reuniting with her real family. David Morrison was preparing to become a grandfather to a child who would grow up knowing the truth about their family history, unlike their mother, who had lived 17 years believing carefully constructed lies. Dad had lost everything material that Patricia had spent years stealing, but the Federal Asset Recovery Program had helped him retain enough resources to rent a small apartment and begin rebuilding his life. He attended every court hearing during Patricia's prosecution, seeking to understand the scope of manipulation that had destroyed our family relationship. We had begun meeting monthly for coffee, slowly attempting to rebuild some connection, despite the years of damage and betrayal that stood between us. Dad was attending therapy to address his guilt and confusion about how completely Patricia had manipulated his judgment and decision-making. "I keep thinking about signs I should have noticed," Dad said during one of our cautious conversations. "Patricia's questions about finances, her insistence on managing household decisions, the way she systematically isolated me from you. A better father would have protected his daughter instead of choosing his wife." These meetings felt both healing and heartbreaking. I could see genuine remorse in Dad's eyes, and I understood that he was struggling to forgive himself for choices that had cost us both the relationship we had treasured. But forgiveness did not automatically restore trust or intimacy that had been destroyed through years of separation. "Dad, I replied carefully. Patricia specialized in targeting good fathers who wanted to provide complete families for their children. Your love for me, Beast, made you vulnerable to her manipulation because she convinced you that choosing her was choosing what was best for our family. Agent Santos had kept me informed about the broader federal investigation, which ultimately identified 17 families that Patricia had victimized over 22 years. Her criminal enterprise had operated across 6 states, generating millions of dollars through identity theft insurance fraud and systematic asset liquidation. 3 additional kidnapped children had been recovered and reunited with their biological families, each requiring extensive therapy and support to recover from years of psychological manipulation. Patricia's techniques for erasing authentic identities and replacing them with fabricated histories had been refined through decades of practice. The investigation had also revealed Patricia's network of criminal associates, leading to additional arrests and prosecutions that dismantled an entire organized crime syndicate. Federal prosecutors described the case as one of the most significant victories against family-based criminal enterprises in recent history. Eleanor's inheritance had provided me with resources to establish the Thompson Foundation for Displaced Youth, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping teenagers who had been abandoned by their families or removed from their homes under false circumstances. The foundation provided housing assistance, educational support, and legal advocacy for young people navigating the complex process of emancipation and independence. The foundation's first residential facility was a beautifully restored Victorian house that could accommodate 12 teenagers while they completed high school and prepared for college or vocational training. Eleanor would have been proud to know that her legacy was helping other young people avoid the homelessness and desperation that I had experienced. Working with displaced teenagers had taught me that my experience, while traumatic and unfair, had also developed resilience and independence that served me throughout my adult life. Patricia's attempt to destroy me had actually strengthened my capacity for empathy, determination, and success in ways she never could have anticipated. I realized something important during this entire process. I told Dad during our most recent coffee meeting. Patricia took away our relationship for 12 years, but she could not take away the love and values you taught me during my childhood. Those lessons carried me through homelessness, helped me build a successful business, and gave me the strength to seek justice. Dad's eyes filled with tears as he listened to my reflection on how his early parenting had provided foundations for surviving Patricia's destruction. I am so proud of the woman you became. Despite everything I put you through, he said quietly, you are stronger and more successful than I ever imagined possible. Our relationship would never fully recover the intimacy and trust we had shared before Patricia's manipulation, but we were building something new based on mutual respect and understanding of what we had both survived. Dad remained part of my life, attending foundation fundraising events and celebrating my continued business success. The greatest lesson I learned through this entire experience was that family is not just about blood relationships or legal obligations. Family is about people who choose to love and support each other through difficult circumstances, who refuse to abandon each other when life becomes challenging. Eleanor had been more of a mother to me than Patricia ever attempted to be. The teenagers I supported through the foundation became siblings in ways that transcended biological connections. Dad and I were rebuilding our relationship based on conscious choice rather than automatic assumption. Patricia had believed that destroying my relationship with Dad would leave me isolated and vulnerable to future manipulation. Instead, her crimes had taught me to recognize genuine love and authentic connection while building a chosen family of people who shared my values and supported my dreams. Standing in my beautiful house, surrounded by the life I had built through determination and the support of people who truly cared about my well-being, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment of peace and success. Patricia was spending her remaining years in federal prison where she could no longer target innocent families or destroy children's relationships with their parents. Justice had been served, but more importantly, healing had begun for everyone whose lives she had damaged through her decades of criminal manipulation. I had learned that the greatest revenge against those who try to destroy us is not causing them pain in return, but using their attacks as motivation to build something beautiful that helps other people avoid similar suffering. Patricia's attempt to destroy my life had become the foundation for helping other young people find hope, healing, and independence. The little girl who had been thrown out of her father's house for crimes she did not commit had grown into a woman who used her pain to create something meaningful and lasting. That transformation was the ultimate victory over everything Patricia had tried to accomplish through her years of manipulation and cruelty. Has someone in your life ever manipulated a situation to turn your family against you? How did you find the strength to rebuild and move forward? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who is facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help it reach others who might need to hear this message of hope and resilience. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice in difficult circumstances. And please share this video with friends or family members who might benefit from knowing that it is possible to survive manipulation and build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Together, we can help more people recognize the signs of manipulation and find the courage to seek truth and justice. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes in the power of resilience, truth, and chosen family. Remember that your worth is not determined by those who choose to leave your life, but by the love and support you build with people who truly value who you are. May you always find the strength to seek truth, the courage to demand justice, and the wisdom to build something beautiful from whatever challenges life brings your way.